No signs of an end to the fighting in Gaza. The CDC confronts criticism over its new mask policy and a media mega deal for the streaming era. Monday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Monday, May 17th. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hey, Carlo.
Happy Monday, Jill. How was your weekend?
It was pretty good. How was yours?
Pretty slow. Nice weather. Great weather. But yeah, we're basically in hunker down, wait for this baby mode now. Not much going on over here except for that.
I remember the feeling, and it's just weird to know it could happen anytime. And you leave your apartment, and the next time you come back, it's with a baby that you are in charge of keeping alive and healthy and happy.
It's really like unsettling almost. It's just like I think we both are just like, we just want this baby here already. Like Becky is so uncomfortable at this point. I don't know how you guys do this. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on this, but it's just like how you're able to just live your life with this gigantic bowling ball in your stomach. It's amazing.
Well, that's why I think that if you can, I've always said being pregnant during the pandemic is probably like a huge win. You don't have to, you remember, I was waddling around this office trying to figure out a plan for Need to Know while I was on maternity leave. And I think eventually our old boss, Jim Roberts, I remember he was looking at me even later in terms of my pregnancy than where Becky is. I was like getting my hair and makeup done, and he just looked at me and he's like, I think you're done here. I think we'll see you in a couple months. And I'm like, Jim, thank you. And I did my last day, and that was it.
Every time Becky gets like a little annoyed at something, I'm like, you don't understand. We happen to have timed this perfectly, and I tell her that exact story. Like, she doesn't have to take the subway, she doesn't have to waddle around her office. Yeah, this really was an actually great time to get pregnant. And then
you don't have to deal with the comments. Everybody wants to. That's going to be a big baby, or you ready to pop? Yeah. It's like, just leave me the heck alone, okay?
Totally.
All right. But Carlo, let's get to some news here.
Please.
The Israeli military says that it destroyed 9 miles of tunnels used by Hamas inside of Gaza in the heaviest airstrike seen since the latest conflict began a week ago. Militants in Gaza continued to fire barrages of rockets into Israel over the weekend as the fighting showed no signs of dying down, even amid efforts of diplomacy by both the U.S. and the UN. Early Saturday, Israel leveled a building in Gaza City that housed international media organizations like the Associated Press and Al Jazeera. Israel said that building, though, was also being used by Hamas. Occupants of the building were given an hour to evacuate before it was taken down. Of the nearly 200 Palestinians who have been killed in airstrikes in the last week, about nearly half, women and children, according to officials in Gaza. 10 people in Israel have been killed, including 2 children and also a soldier, according to the AP.
I just want to stay for a second with the story about them taking down that building that housed the Associated Press. So this is the statement that was released by Gary Pruitt, who's the president and the CEO of the AP. Quoting now, "We are shocked and horrified that the Israeli military would target and destroy the building housing AP's bureau and other news organizations in Gaza. They have long known the location of our bureau and knew journalists were there. We received a warning that the building would be hit. We are seeking information from the Israeli government and are engaged with the U.S. State Department to try to learn more. This is an incredibly disturbing development. We narrowly avoided a terrible loss of life. A dozen AP journalists and freelancers were inside the building, and thankfully we were able to evacuate them in time. The world will know less about what is happening in Gaza because of this." AP basically saying they've been in that building for 15 years. They didn't see Hamas anywhere. There was no evidence presented to them that Hamas was there. I'm not saying that they weren't. We know for a fact that Hamas often uses civilian and media infrastructure as, sort of shields for its operations. That said, I think that any journalist or any American who says that they value press freedom should really be horrified by that. To me, I don't care if that building was housing Tucker Carlson's studio and Osama bin Laden was hosting a tea party in the green room. Like, you just don't really do that. You don't really bomb media infrastructure, especially American media infrastructure. I don't want to get into imagine if somebody else did that. But all I was thinking about this weekend was just imagine if, Vladimir Putin did that to the AP bureau in Kiev because there were Ukrainian separatists using that building to launch attacks. I mean, we would be issuing sanctions or more. And instead, the American position is basically just that this is a cause for concern.
So we often, and so apropos of nothing in terms of what happened this weekend with the AP office in Gaza, I think you can make a very strong argument that Israel is losing the PR war here, which is a much less serious war than actual human lives. But it does matter in terms of public perception, and whether it's on social media or wherever else, Israel is not winning this from a public relations standpoint. We have often talked about how both Israelis and Palestinians do not feel like Western media is fair to them. You hear a lot of complaints from both sides, regardless of the report. However, I did want to mention, and again, this is apropos of nothing in relation to the attack over the weekend. This is a totally separate thing. There was this really incredible piece in The Atlantic from a former AP reporter and editor who was in the Jerusalem bureau. And he really talked about and laid out with specific examples how anti-Israel bias is just ingrained into the reporting from the region. So basically, he says that reporters and photographers come into town on a transitory basis, right? So it's a couple-year gig or a few-year gig or whatnot. Then they become ingrained with a group of NGOs and diplomats from the UN, from human rights groups, and this becomes their social circle. It's the people that they date, it's the people that they hang out with on the weekends or whatever it may be, and it's also their sources. So they never really do critical pieces on these groups that get millions and millions of dollars to do what, I'm not really sure, but they don't ever, these become their sources. So I just want to read a quote from what he said because I just thought it was pretty powerful. He says, "In these circles, in my experience, a distaste for Israel has come to be something between an acceptable prejudice and a prerequisite for entry. And I don't mean a critical approach to Israeli policies or the ham-fisted government that's currently in charge in this country." Which you and I have talked about. You could criticize Netanyahu, you could criticize the Israeli government. But he said, "It is a belief, though, to some extent, that Jews of Israel are a symbol of the world's ills, particularly those connected to nationalism, militarism, colonialism, and racism, an idea quickly becoming one of the central elements of the progressive Western zeitgeist, spreading from the European left to American college campuses and intellectuals, including journalists. In this social group, this sentiment is translated into editorial decisions made by individual reporters and editors covering Israel, and this, in turn, gives such thinking the means of mass self-replication." I mean, I found that chilling as a Jewish person, but more as just a journalist. I mean, that's unacceptable. And he gave a few practical examples. So he says AP's Jerusalem bureau didn't cover or suppressed a story about an Israeli peace offer to the Palestinians back in 2008. There was also this rally that he pointed to as a prime example of a university in East Jerusalem, Al-Quds University, Palestinians dressed up as dead Israeli soldiers. And he said, this is a big story. This is a few hundred feet from where Jews live. And when you're trying to understand the dynamic and why Israeli Jews might feel the need to have a police presence, this might help you in understanding that. There was also a feeling, he said, that Hamas's development of this extensive armament in Gaza in recent years, not really worth serious coverage, even though objectively, as we're seeing now, these rockets are being used. Objectively, he says, this is one of the most important storylines that demanded attention. He said the AP staff in Gaza City would witness a rocket launch right beside their office, endangering reporters and other civilians nearby, and just simply not report about it. Again, not justification, unrelated to any of of what happened this past weekend. And when we talk about that, and sometimes we forget because we're just in this cycle right now of a huge war, but Israelis will tell you, Gaza, that Hamas is always firing rockets in some degree in southern Israel. But he describes numerous other examples. And the reason I wanted to mention this is because, A, it's not getting a lot of play. And B, everybody uses the AP, right? Cheddar, for example. We use the AP. Yeah. It's a wire service. For the most part, every news organization, particularly in the U.S., uses the Associated Press. You can't possibly, as a news organization, have your own reporters everywhere on the globe covering every single conflict or every single story. Right. So you rely on these wire services for coverage. So I don't know. Again, this isn't about who's right or wrong in this particular conflict right now with Israel and the Palestinians, and it's got to stop the fighting. Too many people are dying. They've got to figure out a long-term solution here. But this report, this piece blew me away, Carlo. And as a journalist, I'm just curious what you think.
Yeah, I thought it was a fascinating piece. I read it yesterday. Sure, I mean, I don't doubt anything in it. I'm sure there's media biases. Specific to Israel, just like there are everywhere. And I think that it's certainly difficult because the Associated Press is very important for us. But of course, I mean, look, media organizations are humans, right? They're run by humans. Humans have biases, inherent biases. One thing that you said that I just wanted to circle back to about the PR campaign, Israel sort of losing the PR campaign. I don't know if you saw this, but Bob Menendez, who is probably the most pro-Israel Democrat in the Senate, he's a senator from New Jersey, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, one of just 4 Democrats in the Senate who voted against the Iran deal. He goes to AIPAC, he gets huge cheers. He criticized Israel in a statement over the weekend, which I saw that and I was like, whoa, Bob Menendez? That's something, because you didn't used to see that sort of thing. So I just think that speaks to what you were saying about sort of a shift in public perception. I think the last thing that I'll say before I'm canceled here, as several people have said that they would like me to be, which is fine. I've been canceled before. I'll probably be canceled again. American tax dollars being used to sort of like underwrite the destruction of a besieged territory's media infrastructure and the killing of civilians, which is a fact, right? That's a fact. I think that you can be pro-Israel. I think that you can be sympathetic to the plight of the Jewish people, both here and in Israel. Obviously, I think you can believe that Israel has a right to not only exist, but to defend itself. And I think that you can still be aghast that your money, your tax money, is being used to fund the destruction of an American news outlet, as well as the deaths of innocent civilian casualties, including children. And I know Hamas kills civilians too, and children in Israel have died as well. I just don't think that those are diametrically opposed viewpoints. And I sort of resent the narrative that's out there that just by merely mentioning this, that it's some sort of like implicit support of Hamas. I mean, Hamas is terrible. They're a terrorist organization. They're bad, straight up, right? They kill civilians. But Israel's a client state of the United States. We give Israel $4 billion a year in military aid, I believe. Therefore, this is effectively American foreign policy, and I think that we as Americans have a right to debate it and speak up about it.
Okay, Carlo, let's move on here and talk a little bit about the pandemic. 6 months since the first COVID vaccine dose was given out in the U.S., about 60% of the adult population has now received at least one shot. Meanwhile, the CDC director faced new questions about the confusion from the agency's surprising decision to lift its mask recommendation, saying over the weekend that vaccinated people, quote, are not at risk of severe disease and hospitalization and can therefore go maskless. If you are not vaccinated, you are not safe, she said.
That's pretty much, putting it in terms that I think we can all understand. But yeah, there's certainly some blowback that they're getting for this recommendation. I think a lot of people are second guessing the mask guidance, which people are just second guessing everything. I guess the CDC does at this point. I did think it's a little bit interesting, just sort of out in the world, that how few businesses, at least here in Brooklyn, have changed their policies. Everyone's pretty much still masked up inside everywhere. I think the only 2 big national chains that have dropped their mask orders, to my understanding, are Trader Joe's and Walmart. So I don't know, maybe we'll see some more of those in the coming weeks. But we're in a good place in the pandemic, getting better. The vaccine uptake is actually, the numbers are going back up, which I think is probably has to do with just there's teenagers now involved. So that's going to juice the numbers a little bit, which is good. And also just because, Jill, I know you and I have been sort of like tallying some of the best sort of like most creative solutions to getting people vaccinated. I thought this one was awesome, and big shout out to these folks down in Alabama, the Talladega Speedway, which is where they host the big NASCAR race. They're doing vaccinations there, and if you get vaccinated, they actually let you drive 2 laps on the famous course, which I thought is awesome. That to me is the best one yet in terms of these sort of like incentives. The
big question that I'm hearing from a lot of people right now is just, what does this mean for children and for families?
Right, yeah.
So the CDC guidelines are pretty awesome and pretty clear. If you're just a single person living in the world
right.
with nothing else, and you're by yourself and you don't have exposure to high-risk people or whatever it may be. But a lot of people wondering, okay, so just say you have a 10-year-old who can't get vaccinated, can you go indoors to a restaurant, and should they wear a mask? And how are they going to feel that they're wearing a mask but their parents aren't wearing masks? And I think the honor code of expecting that unvaccinated people are going to wear masks, I just think is not going to work in any capacity. And I don't know. And so I think that's the biggest concern, and I've yet to hear a really good answer on that. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of places, even like New York, and I understand it, saying, hold on, we appreciate these recommendations, but we need to figure out how this is going to work in a practical sense.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
And it's a huge concern. And when look, your little one's about to come, you're going to want to take her out, and you're going to be wondering, are all of these people, I'm safe, Becky's safe, but, what about her? Okay. Switching gears, Bill Gates has now acknowledged that he had an extramarital affair with a Microsoft employee 2 decades ago, which led Microsoft's board to launch an investigation last year just before Gates resigned from the board. More reporting is coming out in the aftermath of Bill and Melinda Gates' divorce, including allegations that Gates had developed a reputation for questionable workplace behavior at both Microsoft and his foundation, and that he consulted convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein for advice on how to end his marriage. Bill Gates, what?
Oh, God.
What is this story?
Lot of reporting this weekend. Journal, I believe the Financial Times had a piece, the New York Times had a piece, the Daily Beast had a piece. This is, I think, to be expected, just because, you should always be skeptical of reporting that comes out in the wake of a contentious divorce, because it's almost always planted by one side or the other. That's just a fact. Gates' spokesperson, for the record, says it's false that he consulted with Epstein on his on him getting divorced. But it is a fact that Bill Gates was friendly, at the very least, with Jeffrey Epstein, and you have to ask yourself why. I mean, if you're Bill Gates, you're like, no.
No. Okay, listen. Jeffrey Epstein, super, obviously super rich, super well connected, put a lot of money in these sort of science things.
No.
I don't know. Our friend of the pod, Scott Galloway, has made the point that you can't, so far, all of the reporting about Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates, at least besides for this, that he asked him for advice on his divorce, which seems kind of insane, that it's all just been circumstantial. And then Kara Swisher, the other co-host, she said, look, I was at a dinner where Jeffrey Epstein was, sitting 10 feet away from him or whatever. Am I related? Somebody could say, if something ever came about her, Kara Swisher, who ran in Jeffrey Epstein's circle. So we have to be careful to just not always... just because somebody had associations with them. These are super rich people. They have their hands in everything. Perhaps he was looking for money for his foundation. Again, innocent until proven guilty. And I don't think that you can just say, because he had a meeting with the guy, that all of a sudden there's something fishy going on.
Well, he had more than a meeting. He had, according to the Daily Beast reporting, he was a well-known, person who would come to Jeffrey Epstein's mansion in New York and hang out there. And that may be totally fine. You're entitled to be friends with whoever you want to. I just think it's a little bit odd that the richest person in the world would be looking for money from anybody, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, Jeffrey Epstein is just toxic no other way around it.
Right.
Okay, some big media news. The AT&T is expected to announce as soon as today that it'll spin off Warner Media and combine it with Discovery. The new media company would be publicly traded and co-owned by AT&T and Discovery shareholders, according to reports. Discovery owns reality-heavy assets like HGTV, TLC, and the Food Network. The spin-off would be surprising, given that AT&T paid $85 billion to acquire HBO, CNN, Warner Brothers, Cartoon Network, TBS, and TNT, and then put them under one roof less than 3 years ago.
It's all about this growing streaming duopoly of Netflix and Disney Plus. That's how that's what all of these companies are trying to figure out how to deal with now. Hard to compete with that on just prestige programming alone, like HBO Max. So you got to get in some of the guilty pleasure reality stuff that Discovery trades in, like all of these like home renovation shows and Animal Planet shows. I think that's the strategy, at least. But yeah, we'll probably get confirmation of this merger this morning if I had to bet. Mergers usually happen on Mondays, right?
Merger Mondays.
Merger Monday, yep.
Because you do the final deals over the weekend, I guess.
Right.
Before we go, don't forget today's tax day. So you've got until the end of today to get your federal taxes postmarked and in the mail or filed electronically. Every state with an income tax except Iowa, Maryland, Oklahoma, and Hawaii also have deadlines today.
And if you just forgot to prep your taxes this year because of everything being insane and whatnot, all you have to do is e-file this one IRS form. It's called Form 4868. I linked to it in the newsletter if you need it. You can request an automatic extension. They'll grant you that no matter what, and you get until October 15th.
All right, everybody, that's what you need to know for Monday, May 17th.
Have a good one, guys.